You see her across the room, calm, confident, completely uninterested in you. She laughs with someone else, checks her phone, glances around the room, but never really looks your way. And in that moment, something strange happens inside your mind. You start thinking, what does that guy have that I don't? You start wondering if maybe she just isn't the type who would ever notice you. But here's the truth. Most men never realize. A woman's attraction rarely starts with interest. It starts with curiosity. And curiosity is something you can create, even when she thinks she's not interested in you at all. Because attraction isn't logical, it's emotional, psychological, sometimes even mysterious. And the men who understand this play the game very differently. Welcome back to Female Code Unlocked. This is the place where we decode female psychology, hidden attraction triggers, and the subtle emotional signals most men completely miss. If you want to understand women on a deeper psychological level and become the kind of man women naturally gravitate toward, make sure you subscribe and join the movement. Now let's talk about the uncomfortable truth most men avoid. When a woman first meets you, she usually decides within seconds how she categorizes you. Not forever, but for that moment. Maybe she sees you as background noise. Maybe she sees you as just another guy. Maybe she barely notices you at all. And that's exactly where most men make their biggest mistake. They try harder. They talk more. They compliment her. They try to prove their worth. But psychologically, this almost always backfires. Because when you chase attention, you silently communicate something powerful. You communicate that her approval is more valuable than your presence. And the moment that dynamic forms, attraction quietly disappears. Women are incredibly sensitive to emotional value. Not the value you claim, but the value you demonstrate through behavior. Think about the last time you met someone who seemed completely comfortable in their own world. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They weren't seeking validation. They just existed with quiet confidence. Did you notice how people slowly gravitated toward them? That's the energy women respond to on a subconscious level. Not loud confidence, not arrogance, but emotional independence. The kind that says, I enjoy meeting people, but I don't need anyone's approval to feel complete. And when a woman senses that energy, something interesting happens inside her mind. Her brain begins asking questions. Why is he so calm? Why isn't he trying to impress me? Why does he seem completely unaffected by my reaction? And the moment her mind starts asking those questions, curiosity is born. Remember, attraction rarely begins with instant desire. It begins with intrigue. With the feeling that there might be something deeper about you she hasn't figured out yet. That's why the most attractive men often do something very counterintuitive. They slow down. Instead of trying to win her attention, they let the moment breathe. Imagine you're talking to a woman who initially seems uninterested. She gives short answers. She glances away occasionally. Her body language feels distant. Most men panic here. They start talking faster, telling jokes, trying to fix the situation. But the man who understands female psychology does something different. He doesn't chase energy. He observes it. He stays relaxed. He pauses comfortably. He speaks slowly, like someone who has nowhere else he needs to be. And that subtle behavior sends a powerful psychological message. It tells her, this man is not emotionally dependent on my reaction. That alone separates you from 90% of men she meets. Because most men unknowingly reveal their intentions within seconds. They become predictable. But unpredictability is one of the strongest psychological triggers of attraction. When a woman cannot instantly categorize you, her mind stays engaged. And when her mind stays engaged, your presence lingers in her thoughts longer than expected. Suddenly, the man she initially ignored becomes intriguing. Not because you chased her attention, but because you never needed it. And this is only the beginning of understanding how attraction truly forms inside a woman's mind. Because in the next part, we're going to talk about a psychological shift that can completely change how a woman sees you. Even if she originally felt zero interest, there's a moment that happens in almost every interaction between a man and a woman, but most men are completely blind to it. It's the moment where her mind quietly decides one thing. Is this man emotionally predictable? Or is there something about him I can't quite figure out yet? And that decision shapes everything that follows. You see, women are not just attracted to looks, status, or words. Those things matter, but they are rarely what create obsession. What actually creates fascination is something much deeper. It's emotional contrast. Think about this for a second. If every man she meets behaves the same way, compliments her, tries to impress her, laughs at everything she says, constantly seeks her validation, then her brain quickly categorizes those men as familiar, safe, predictable, forgettable. But the moment a man breaks that pattern, her psychology shifts. Suddenly, her brain slows down and begins paying closer attention. Imagine you're speaking to her, and she tells a story about something funny that happened during her day. Most men react instantly. They laugh loudly. They agree with everything. They try to keep the energy high so she stays entertained. But the man who understands emotional psychology reacts differently. He listens carefully. He pauses. Then he smiles slightly and says something calm like, "Interesting, but I feel like you're leaving out the best part of that story." Now something subtle just happened. You didn't just react. You challenged her narrative. Not aggressively, but playfully. And that small moment does something powerful inside her mind. It disrupts expectation. Suddenly she's thinking, wait, what does he mean by that? You've just activated curiosity again. Women are naturally drawn to emotional puzzles, not confusing men, but men who don't immediately reveal everything about themselves. A man who keeps a little mystery in his tone, his reactions, and his presence. And here's where things get even more interesting. Most men believe attraction grows when they show how much they like a woman, but psychology often works in the opposite direction. Attraction grows when a woman begins wondering how much you like her. Notice the difference. When you constantly prove interest, her mind relaxes. The mystery disappears. But when your behavior remains calm, warm, yet slightly unpredictable, her brain starts working. She begins observing you more closely. Your tone, your reactions, your silence. And silence, when used correctly, is incredibly powerful. Because silence creates space for imagination. Let's say she says something teasing like, "So, are you always this quiet?" Most men rush to explain themselves. They say things like, "No, I'm actually really talkative once you get to know me." But the man who understands psychological attraction simply smiles and says, "Maybe." Just one word. And suddenly, her mind fills in the rest. Maybe he's mysterious. Maybe he's confident. Maybe there's more to him than I thought. You didn't force attraction. You allowed her imagination to participate. And imagination is one of the strongest emotional amplifiers in human psychology. Because when a woman starts imagining who you are, she becomes invested in discovering more. And that's when something fascinating begins to happen. The woman who initially showed zero interest slowly starts leaning into the conversation. She asks more questions. Her body language shifts. Her attention becomes sharper. Not because you tried to convince her, but because you created something rare in her social world. A man who doesn't chase approval. A man who understands emotional pacing. A man who knows that sometimes the most powerful move is simply not rushing the moment. But there's one deeper psychological trigger most men never realize they're activating. And when used correctly, it can completely change how a woman emotionally perceives you. At some point in the interaction, something subtle begins to shift. You might not even notice it at first. But she does. It's the moment when a woman stops simply responding to you and starts studying you. Her eyes linger a little longer. Her questions become slightly more personal. Her energy softens just enough to reveal curiosity. And this is where most men accidentally ruin everything, because the second they sense interest, they rush in. They start trying to secure it. They become more eager, more available, more expressive, almost like someone who just discovered a rare treasure and suddenly fears losing it. But psychologically, this reaction quietly destroys the very tension that created her curiosity in the first place. Because attraction thrives in emotional space. Think about a movie you couldn't stop watching. It wasn't exciting because the story revealed everything immediately. It was exciting because the story kept unfolding, piece by piece, moment by moment. Human attraction works the same way. When a woman feels like she already understands you completely, the mystery fades. But when she senses there are layers she hasn't uncovered yet, her mind stays engaged. This is why the most captivating men often share something interesting, and then pull the emotional spotlight away from themselves. For example, imagine she asks you, "So, what do you usually do on weekends?" Most men answer this like a job interview. They list activities: gym, hanging out with friends, watching movies. Predictable, forgettable. But the man who understands emotional intrigue answers differently. He might smile slightly and say, "Honestly, weekends are when I disappear for a bit." Now she's curious. "What do you mean?" You pause just long enough to let the question breathe. Then you respond calmly. "I like finding places where there's no noise, no pressure, just time to think. It resets everything." Notice what just happened. You didn't just answer her question. You revealed a glimpse of your world, without fully explaining it. And that tiny piece of emotional depth triggers something powerful inside her psychology. Women are naturally drawn to men who appear to have an inner world, a mind that isn't constantly seeking stimulation or validation. A man who can exist comfortably within his own thoughts, because that kind of presence feels rare, and rarity creates value. But here's where the deeper psychological layer appears. The more emotionally centered you appear, the more a woman begins to wonder how she fits into your world, not the other way around. Most men walk into interactions asking themselves, "How do I fit into her life?" But the men who create fascination flip the entire dynamic. Without arrogance, without trying, they quietly communicate something powerful. My life already has meaning. If you're part of it, that's a bonus, not the foundation. And that mindset changes everything. Because women are incredibly intuitive about emotional energy. They can sense when a man feels incomplete versus when he feels whole. And when you appear emotionally whole, something very interesting begins to happen. Instead of you chasing connection, she begins moving closer to it. Her voice softens, her posture relaxes, her curiosity grows. But there is one psychological trigger even stronger than mystery and emotional independence. A trigger that can completely flip a woman's perception of you, even if she initially believed she wasn't interested at all. And it's something very few men ever learn to use. There's a moment in human psychology that changes everything. A moment when someone stops seeing you as just another person in the room, and suddenly starts seeing you as someone different. Someone worth noticing, someone worth remembering. And that moment rarely comes from trying harder. It comes from something far more subtle: perspective. You see, the strongest psychological shift in attraction happens when a woman begins to feel that your attention is selective, not easily given, not freely handed out to everyone, but something she has to earn emotionally. Most men do the opposite. The moment they meet a woman they find attractive, they immediately place her on a pedestal. Their attention becomes constant. Their approval becomes obvious. Their curiosity becomes intense. And while it feels natural, it quietly removes the psychological tension that creates attraction. Because attention that is freely given to everyone loses its value, but attention that feels chosen feels powerful. Imagine you're speaking with her and she tells you something about herself, maybe a hobby, a habit, or something she enjoys doing. Most men instantly respond with approval. That's cool. That's amazing. That's awesome. But the man who understands psychological dynamics listens more carefully. Instead of reacting instantly, he studies the moment. He looks at her for a second longer. Then he might say something like, "Interesting. I didn't expect that from you." Now suddenly, the emotional frame has shifted. She's curious again. "What do you mean?" And instead of rushing to explain, you give a thoughtful observation. Most people talk about things they think make them interesting. But the way you described that, it felt genuine. That moment does something incredibly powerful inside her mind. Because instead of chasing her approval, you just evaluated her. You showed that you're paying attention, not just admiring. And psychologically, that changes the entire dynamic. Women are used to being desired, but being understood and observed, that's rare. And rarity creates emotional impact. But there's another layer to this that goes even deeper. When a woman realizes that you're not easily impressed, not desperate for attention, and not trying to win her validation, something unexpected happens. She starts trying to win yours. Not consciously, not in an obvious way, but subtly. Her energy shifts. She asks more questions. She laughs a little easier. She becomes more expressive. Because now the emotional dynamic has flipped. Instead of you trying to prove your worth, she's trying to understand yours. And this is the moment attraction quietly begins to grow. Not because you convinced her, not because you chased her, but because you allowed her psychology to engage naturally. You created curiosity. You maintained emotional independence. You revealed depth without desperation. And when those three elements come together, attraction stops feeling forced. It starts feeling inevitable. Because the truth about female psychology is something very few people openly talk about. Women are not drawn to men who desperately want them. They are drawn to men whose presence makes them feel something different, something intriguing, something calm, something slightly mysterious, the kind of energy that lingers in their thoughts long after the conversation ends, the kind of presence that makes them wonder later that night, "Why do I keep thinking about him?" And that's the real secret. Attraction isn't about making a woman want you immediately. It's about creating an experience she can't easily forget. Because the men women think about the most are rarely the ones who tried the hardest. They're the ones who made her mind pause, the ones who made her curiosity grow, the ones who quietly made her realize there might be something about him she hasn't figured out yet, and sometimes that feeling alone is enough to change everything. If you enjoyed this video and want to continue unlocking the hidden layers of female psychology, make sure you subscribe to Female Code Unlocked and join us for the next deep dive into the emotional and psychological dynamics of attraction. Because once you start understanding the psychology behind human connection, you'll never look at attraction the same way again.